Now, question number 10 is in the name of Deputy Clare Daly. Deputy Pringle and Deputy Sullivan have similar questions. So, number 10.
I propose to take questions 10, 15 and 67 together.
Thank you. From 15, 67.
I am unaware of any case in which citizens are being detained in prison in Northern Ireland without either having been charged or convicted. There are cases where persons were convicted and were subsequently released on licence and have been reincarcerated on the basis that they are in breach of their licence condition. The devolution arrangements agreed in 2010 provide that the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland remains responsible for national security matters. My officials in the British-Irish Governmental Secretariat in Belfast continue to raise appropriate prisoner cases with their British counterparts. As the House will know, I have on a number of occasions raised the Government's concern about a very limited number of related licence revocation cases directly with the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. Policing and justice powers were fully devolved to the Northern Ireland Executive in 2010, following an all-party agreement reached at Hillsborough Castle. This was a positive development for partnership government in Northern Ireland and a boost to the peace process. Completing the devolution of policing and justice powers to the Executive had been a very high priority since 1998, as successive governments, supported by all sides of this House, recognised that building and strengthening confidence across the community in policing and justice was essential to the success, legitimacy and sustainability of the devolved institutions and to embedding peace. In April 2010, David Ford MLA was appointed Minister of Justice and assumed responsibilities for policing and criminal justice policy. Prisons policy forms a central part of the Department of Justice's remit, and an executive agency, namely the Northern Ireland Prison Service, implements prison policy in Northern Ireland. A prisoner ombudsman is also appointed by the Minister of Justice for Northern Ireland and operates completely independently of the Northern Ireland Prison Service. The prisoner ombudsman and his team investigates complaints from prisoners and visitors to prisoners in Northern Ireland, as well as deaths in custody. An early priority for the Department of Justice was commissioning of a major report into prison reform. In October 2011, Dame Anne Ors made far-reaching recommendations related to prison reform in Northern Ireland. I understand that steady progress has been made to date in implementing the recommended reforms contained within that report. I wholeheartedly agree with Minister Ford's analysis that delivery of a reformed justice system has a major part to play in building and protecting a more positive future for Northern Ireland. I also agree with recent comments Minister Ford has made, praising new recruits to the Northern Ireland Prison Service for their commitment to the new prison service. In looking forward to a better future for the several hundreds of recent recruits, I am sure the whole House joins with me once again in condemning the brutal murder of their colleague, Prison Officer David Black, last November by dissident terrorists. With the devolution of policing and justice, the Irish Government's primary responsibility is to ensure the systems which are in place are robust and consistent with the principles and values of the Good Friday Agreement and other agreements for which we are co-guarantors. The Government's position continues to be that the full implementation of all the recommendation of the Ors report remains the most effective way to ensure the conditions within all prisons in Northern Ireland are of an acceptable standard. I have discussed this with Minister Ford in recent times, and we are of one mind on this matter.
Margaret Thonston, Dr. Clare Daly.
Yeah, thanks, Ceann Corla. I think the use of language is very important, and we can talk about a revocation of licence, and it can kind of sound fairly harmless. But in reality, what we're talking about here is people who were convicted of crimes, who did their times, who were released on licence, picked up subsequent to that many years later, put in prison without any charges being put to them, without any questions. And the reality is that there are people on this island who have been de facto interned, and I know other deputies will deal in detail with the case of Martin Corey, but a 63-year-old man who's been in prison now for 3.5 years and has yet to be questioned, whose legal team do not know why he's there, and who is not privy to the charges against him. I mean, this is an appalling violation of human rights. In actual fact, it is really kind of like having our own Guantanamo Bay on our doorstep. And you see, all of us would have, and we have roundly condemned the murder of prison officer Black. We signed the book when we were up in McGabry, but it has really nothing got to do with the issues that are being raised here now. A number of deputies this morning attended Newry Courthouse for the hearing of Stephen Murney, a young man who has been in prison now for almost a year because the state fails to put the charges to him. His legal team are absolutely confident that he has no case to answer. The evidence against him is totally flimsy, and yet he's going to lose a year of his life in prison. I think you have got to do more, and Minister Ford certainly has a hell of a lot more to do in this regard.
Well, first of all, some of these cases are before the courts, and therefore I don't intend to comment on the individual cases. As I've said, the issue of policing and prisons is now a devolved function in Northern Ireland. That's a matter for the Northern Ireland authorities. There are some people who had been convicted of offences who were released on licence. The release on licence was not unconditional. There were conditions attached to those releases. They have been rearrested. There are processes that are gone through. I have, as I said, the British Irish Secretariat has discussed these cases, but obviously I can't publicly comment on individual cases which are before the courts.
Deputy Thomas Pringle.
Thank you, Lachlan Gorla. Thomas, so you can take it from your response that your government is quite happy with the system of administrative internment that's operating in the 6 counties at the moment, where people who are having their licences revoked for no apparent reason, without it being explained to them, and they're being interned at the whim of the security services in the north and the British government. So we can take it that your government is actually quite happy with that situation from your response. Would that be a proper reading of your response given here today? And just a similar question, when it seems to be brought it up in your answer in relation to the prison service, does the government think it's acceptable that visitors to the women's prison should be strip searched by the prison officers and the prison service without any apparent reason when they are returning from visits as well?
Thank you, Deputy. Taoiseach.
Well, I think first of all, I think we're discussing these issues at Alaska Court. I think we need to be measured in the use of language. And the term internment is a term which applies to the mass arrest of a large number of people in 1971 who were taken into custody without having any offence committed and against whom no charge was brought and were held for a very long period of time. This is not comparing like with like. We're dealing in these cases with individuals against whom there were convictions, who were released on licence, and part of that licence was that they could be rearrested in certain circumstances. Now, whether they should have been or whether they shouldn't have been, that's a matter that has to be ultimately determined through the processes that are available to them. With regards to the conditions in prisons, as I've said, the running of prisons in Northern Ireland is now a matter for the Northern Ireland Executive. It's devolved to the Northern Ireland Executive. There is a prison service which is responsible for that. There have been reforms that have been recommended by Anne Ors, and I want to say in that regard that I want to welcome comments which were made by the Prison Service Director General Sue McAllister, that the recommendations of the Ors report are and still and will remain the key driver for change across the service, and the Irish Government fully supports this position as the most effective way to ensure that conditions within all prisons in Northern Ireland are of an acceptable standard.
Thank you, Deputy Maureen O'Sullivan.
You mentioned about not wanting to comment on particular cases because processes are going through. The people we're talking about are people who have been denied due process, people who have that criteria you come up with about people who've been interned. They are in there. There's no charge against them. They haven't been questioned by the PSNI. So I don't know how you can't not call that internment, because that exactly is what it is. And I'm just looking at the case of Martin Corey. He's in jail over 3.5 years. He still hasn't been questioned by the PSNI. He still hasn't been told why he's in there. His legal team can't get any, because we met the legal team as well, they can't get any answers. So to me that is internment. He should have been entitled to a parole hearing over a year ago. He's still waiting. Now, he was in court last Friday in Ballymena. The court hearing was to begin at 10. They couldn't start because they couldn't bring him to the prison in time, so he arrived at 20 to 11. This 63-year-old man in handcuffs, accompanied by 2 prison officers, they then decided that he was still a security risk, so that the hearing had to be delayed until more officers could be there, so it began at 12. It went on in a closed hearing until 4 o'clock, back again next Friday. Minister, that is not due process, that is not legal, and it's undermining the Good Friday, Western Park, St Andrews, and that's where our concern is coming from.
Deputy Sullivan. Final reply, Taoiseach.
Well, I did answer a specific question to yourself, Deputy, on that particular case yesterday. I think you had a written question, and I gave you a reply on it. Again, I simply state that he is a convicted prisoner. He was released by the British authorities under licence in 1992. The licence was revoked in April 2010 by the Secretary of State. This issue has been in court. There was a Supreme Court decision on it. There are still court proceedings which are going on, and therefore I don't want to when there are court proceedings going on, I don't want to get into the detail of the case, other than to say that we have raised these cases with the British authorities, and we'll continue to keep a close eye on them.
Margaret, that concludes question time.